Hello and welcome to Case in Point. Great to be with you. I'm Joanne Joseph.
The justice system just fails people who have been violated.
Years after the adoption of the Constitution, gender-based violence and femicide remain a national crisis, undermining women's democratic gains. And later, should our courts change from the aggressive win-lose cross-examination of gender-based violence complainants as we consider options for a victim-centered criminal justice system? As we wrap up Women's Month, we bring you a special discussion on gender-based violence and femicide as part of the SABC News campaign with the United Nations commemorating the 30 years of South Africa's adoption of the Constitution and the 30 articles of the UN's Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We ask how GBVF is undermining the gains of our democracy 30 years in. The Bill of Rights ensured women were recognized as equal citizens. Section 9 of the Constitution also bestows on women the right to life, dignity, privacy and other rights. Women receive specific protection in that the state may not unfairly discriminate against anyone on grounds of gender, sex, pregnancy, marital status or sexual orientation. Section 10 further guarantees the right to human dignity, while Section 12 provides protection against all forms of violence. That's apart from other policies introduced to lower GBVF in South Africa over the years, including the recent National Strategic Plan on Gender-Based Violence and Femicide. Yet, tens of thousands of women are assaulted, raped and killed every year. While the statistics give us an overview, our producer, Sebe Buthelezi, caught up with a GBVF survivor for whom the law has been cold comfort. Please be warned that viewer discretion is advised regarding some of the images in this insert.
For 30 years, South Africa's constitution has guaranteed women the right to dignity, equality, and protection under the law. From customary to religious marriages and same-sex unions, sexual and reproductive rights, and other rights, the country's courts have cemented gender equality. Yet gender-based violence and femicide remain the country's most persistent crises. In the majority of gender-violent cases, women are raped, assaulted and killed, often by the very people they know and trust. Karabo Mokoena, Tsegofatso Pule, Uyinene Mkhwetjana, their names have become the face of a crisis that refuses to end. A few out of many whose stories never make national headlines. For one young woman, the abuse and violence began when she was a child. We had to film her away from her home because she feared being identified.
My foster father abused her from the age of 8. We're being raped.
My foster father started abusing me from the age of 8, where he would rape me, beat me, lock me in the house and starve me. Even his friends would force themselves on me, and to a point where he was trying to rape my sister, my twin sister, and she was fighting back. He became violent and pushed her from the stairs, and she rolled on the stairs, bumped her head and died on the spot.
She says after watching her abuser get away with murder and later surviving a gang rape, the justice system failed her.
And I didn't get justice because
I would report my case, but nothing would happen. The police would say they will get back to me, but they wouldn't.
12 years later, she has escaped her abuser, but remains in hiding because her abusers are still walking free. Following pressure to act on the scourge, on the 24th of May 2024, President Cyril Ramaphosa signed the National Council on Gender-Based Violence and Femicide Bill into law. The first council members were appointed in July, but the real test is whether the interventions will be felt by the women who need them.
They fail us. They fail us as a victim of abuse. They don't help us when we need help. Instead of helping us, they just help the perpetrators. So the justice system just fails people who have been violated.
She says the violence has left scars that medication cannot erase. She now has to take this cocktail of pills.
I feel like I'm a normal person, because sometimes I can't do my daily basic things because I'm tired and the medication is too much for me.
Sebe Buthelezi, case in point.
Let's get into the measures taken in recent years in South Africa and on the continent to combat GBVF. Joining us online is Patience Mungwari from UN Women South Africa. Sibongile Ndashe is founder and executive director of the Initiative for Strategic Litigation in Africa. She's currently in Cancun. She's also joining us online. And in studio with us are Zubaida Dangor. She is a doctor from the newly formed National Council on GBV and Femicide. And Sietsi Shuping is the head of legal at the Commission for Gender Equality. Welcome to all of you. Great to have you with us. So, Ms. Mungwari, let me start with you first of all. Just a fundamental question on what you understand to be the driving force for GBVF in South Africa.
Thank you very much for having me at the show, and good evening to the viewers. When we think about gender-based violence in South Africa, we realize that South Africa is a deeply patriarchal society. And so the way we live our lives, the way we do life in general is very patriarchal. So there's a lot of gender inequality, there's a lot of imbalance in power between women and men in the country. And these are the things that fuel gender-based violence. We see that there is the normalization of violence in our societies. We understand violence sometimes to be the way in which we handle disputes, or the ways in which we insert our power as we are doing life. So it is a normalized activity in our country. That's why we find a lot of violence taking place.
Let me bring you in here, Ms. Ndashe. We've got this world-class constitution in South Africa that protects the rights of women on paper. But do you believe our democratic gains as South African women are being undermined by the reality of widespread GBVF?
Definitely. We had this amazing constitution with very strong protections. And what we have seen over the years is jurisprudence coming from the Constitutional Court, which has been said to be world-class. We also had very progressive legislation coming from an industrious, parliament, especially in the beginning. If you remember, in the dying days of apartheid, there was this prevention of family violence that was passed. But as soon as the new government came in, we had the domestic violence legislation, we had the sexual offences legislation. But when you look at the gender-based violence statistics, it really tells us that the legislative and also jurisprudential gains that we have made over the years are failing to make a dent on these factors that Patience was just talking about right now. So there is something that is fundamentally broken, and I think as we assess the 30 years of the Constitution, we need to go back and say, how do we make a connection between these laws and also the judgments of the Constitutional Court? And for some of us who are working in the sector, we have said that the big problem really remains the institutional framework, because we've got the National Strategic Plan, we have got very strong pillars and indicators that tells us what we need to do in order to end the scourge. but we still don't have institutions that are able to respond. And I think that has to be the next phase of our struggle. But yeah, let's talk about that more.
So let's talk about one of the institutions that's come about in recent times. Dr. Dango, we're aware the President has declared GBVF a national emergency. You're part of the brand new National Council on GBV and Femicide, appointed at the end of last month. What is the Council going to do to lower GBV rates?
So in terms of the Act 9 of 2024, the Council is actually mandated to coordinate structured sectoral approach between stakeholders in terms of prevention as well as response. That's the one aim. Then to develop short, medium and long-term priorities which align with the strategic plan, the NSP, as well as the GBVF. And then, of course, to facilitate the sharing of information and best practices. So within this, the idea is really to develop a national plan of action and to coordinate measures in terms of training on gender-based violence and femicide, then to facilitate strategic partnerships throughout the country and from national right down to, I guess, district, community and district levels, and then to coordinate the prioritization of gender-based violence and femicide. So it's a big ask. However, the council was appointed on the 31st of July.
Yes.
The council has not had its inaugural meeting yet with the Minister of Women, Minister Chikunga. So that has delayed us somewhat. We need to be able to have that meeting to be able to actually commence our work. And so based on that, I think, I'm not able to say too much. And I would prefer rather to base my responses on the work that I've done through the National Shelter Movement of South Africa and the NISA Institute, simply because we haven't met and, it's a statutory body, so we need to be able to have a discussion to be able to take this process forward.
Well, let's hope government is taking this seriously. I mean, it says a lot, perhaps, that the minister hasn't been able to meet you yet. But you're in the midst of a process as well, Mr. Shuping. Last month, 3 Chapter 9 institutions, including the Commission for Gender Equality that you represent, announced this national inquiry that's going to look into our criminal justice system's response to GBVF. What are you hoping to achieve with this?
Thank you. This question, to answer it, I'll need to give you a little bit of context in terms of what we are facing. The issue of GBVF should not be only looked at as a justice system issue. It's a human rights issue. It's a gender equality issue. It's an accountability issue. Therefore, the state's response in terms of the justice system and what we are hoping to achieve is that it must be effective. And essentially that takes us now to the aspect of its response. If it doesn't translate into representation, accessible inclusivity of the victims, as well as justice of the survivors of GBV, then we are far from achieving the reality. And essentially, as rightfully pointed out by our panel discussion members here, that in terms of the classification of GBV as a disaster, there needs to be an expedited shift in addressing this. We cannot be proud of our constitution as one of the progressive countries. However, 30 years down the line, we are now in a state of disaster. What has changed? What is wrong with the system that we have been utilizing? And looking back now to the next 30 years, if we don't change something, and 6 months ago we are found to be in a disaster situation, then we need to do something. Otherwise, in our lifetime, we will never see improvement in the justice system.
I mean, that really presents us with quite an ultimatum. Ms. Mungwari, how much of a role do poverty and other socio-economic factors play in increasing the incidence of GBVF in our country?
So poverty, as we know, that women's economic empowerment is important for women to be able to get out of abusive relationships. It is also important in the sense that women are able to look after themselves and contribute meaningfully to the development of this country. And so when we have a large part of our population stuck in poverty, we are going to see a continuation of gender-based violence. And also, I mean, there are many other factors that contribute to the violence that we are seeing in our societies. And I really think that when we think about our lives as South Africans and we think about, the constitution, the great constitution that we always talk about, we need to be thinking about how can we make this constitution alive to the realities of South African women. So most of our women are indigent. They are living in poverty. They are experiencing gender-based violence. These things are the things that are actually hampering them from living the realities of the constitution that we speak of as being a very great constitution.
Just a quick one from you before we go to our ad break, Ms. Ndashe. I mean, we've got all this legislation. We've got all these bodies working towards trying to get to the causes of gender-based violence, which we think we already know. We've got all the policies in place that have come through in recent years. Why, with everything legal on the table and everything official on the table to deal with GBVF, have we not been able to do it?
It's a lack of political will from government mostly. So when you look at this new body, the Council on Ending Gender-Based Violence and Femicide, this is a council that has not received a lot of support from civil society, because from the 1st of August in 2018, women took to the streets of this country and said, we are going to shut down the movement of the total shutdown. And what was asked for was, let's go through previous national strategic plans. Let us decide what does not work so that we are building something that is capable of leading a response. We agreed on the 6 pillars of the national strategic plan. We are currently sitting with a new body that severely undermines the first pillar of the national strategic plan. And this is a body that is allegedly set up to institutionalize and implement the national strategic plan. The first concern is that we needed the response to have coordination, leadership, and accountability. The legislation that is used to set up this council has completely gutted all of those principles and all of those demands from the legislation. So we are talking about a body that has no fund, even though the National Strategic Plan said that there must be a funding mechanism to resource the response. Intergovernmental coordination is also lacking. We are talking about different levels from national, provincial, and municipal. We also don't have in this legislation all of those things around coordination. But the big thing we were talking about was leadership from to ensure that there is departmental coordination to have this more senior people leading the response.
Right.
So this actually tells you that we have a problem.
Well, we're going to take a short break here, and when we come back, we focus on whether GBV survivors and those who became victims of femicide are being acknowledged by the system. Stay with us. We continue our discussion now on whether the experience of GBV survivors and those who become victims of femicide are being acknowledged and whether those experiences are being brought to bear on legislation to better protect women in South Africa. Mr. Shipping, let me just start with you here. The first phase of this probe that you are involved in is supposed to focus on survivors' experiences, those of marginalized groups, and the functioning of the justice system before cases even go to trial. Tell me, what have you uncovered so far in terms of what survivors are actually telling you?
Thank you. In terms of the inquiry, it's run by the 3 Chapter 9s. It is ongoing. So at the moment, we cannot divulge much in terms of the ongoing investigation. What we can, however, provide context on is regarding the several reports that we have already issued, yes, which were not necessarily nationally based at all aspects. But those reports have also highlighted issues where there is lack of support to GBV victims in terms of health support and GBV-centric services. And it will take you back to our constitutional premises. If you read our Constitution, Section 25, providing for the rights of the accused detained persons, it's 2 pages long in our Constitution. But same cannot be said regarding the gender-based, regarding the victims' rights. And that is where we need to start to see how to correct. That does not mean we want accused persons to be afforded lesser rights, but we mean funding that is provided needs to be adequate as well in addressing and lived experiences of the survivors. And at the current rate that we are running at, our report has already shown some of those weaknesses. Now, this inquiry will assist us to answer with definite precision in terms of where we are lacking, where resources can be centralized. One of the key issues we have uncovered is regarding the reporting that is lacking, the type of reporting we are utilizing. It is difficult at this moment to tell in the country, given the technological advances that we are having currently. We cannot click the button at this AI time to see where are the cases lying, where can we centralize resources, instead of being reactive only. That we have seen. But where there is backlog, there is challenges, and whether there are courts officials that are adequate to deal with the cases, it is what we are willing to uncover and to show. And with the current reporting and delays in receiving information, it shows that we have a lot to improve as the country to equate the rights of the victims to those of the accused persons from constitutional perspective.
Dr. Dango, this is the experience of so many GBV survivors. I mean, after their initial trauma, the process of reporting it to insensitive police sometimes, of enduring often hostile medical examinations, leading to secondary victimization. I'm wondering why South Africa's family violence, child protection and sexual offences units haven't been able to counter these harmful responses that GBV survivors actually face.
So I think that services are actually inadequate, firstly. Secondly, we're talking about a lack of standardization of services for GBV survivors across the country. So what would happen is in a particular province, you may find adequate services by one particular organization. But if you look in another province, you're not going to find the same service. So the National Shelter Movement has been calling for standardization of services for survivors of violence for a very long time, and this hasn't actually happened. The other problem is that the resourcing of shelters as well as services for GBV survivors is really uneven, not standardized, and also not accessible. In particular provinces, it becomes really problematic. For example, in Gauteng, for the past 3 years, shelters have been closing down. We have been advocating together with the Gauteng Crisis Care Center. We have been writing to various different bodies, talking to ministers, but for one or other reason, these problems are not being sorted out. So, for example, last year, one of the shelters had to close down for 5 months simply because they didn't receive their funding. Eventually, the funding that came was there because the department wasn't managing its performance targets. So this became really very, very problematic because our aim is to look at the safety of the survivors, and we can't turn women back when they're saying they are escaping a violent situation. Yes. What then happens is, are we asking them to go back and get killed?
I mean, it's a question that hangs in the air and so often actually happens, I suppose, in practice where women do not have that support. But it's bad enough happening in person. Mungwari, we're also living in a time when women are also experiencing technology-related forms of gender-based violence. Are we formulating the right responses to this newer form of abuse?
Thank you so much for touching on technology facilitated gender-based violence. So it is always disheartening to see how much the perpetrators are always finding new ways of harming, and it seems our interventions are always lagging behind. Technology facilitated violence is a very important place that we should be looking at. And currently, we don't see a lot of countries having laws to deal with the issue of technology facilitated violence. South Africa is one of the countries that is looking at this from a legislative perspective. But nonetheless, there is still quite a lot that needs to be happening. So it is one thing to have the laws. It is another thing to then have the people who are supposed to benefit from the laws knowing the laws. And then it is also another thing for the first line responders, the police, the forensic nurses, the people who are supposed to be assisting survivors of gender-based violence to know the law itself and to be able to then assist survivors in the way that they should be receiving the support. So I think while South Africa is very good at having legislation that addresses issues pertaining to gender-based violence, I think we are struggling in the implementation and the awareness of these laws. So this is where we should really be focusing our attention at.
Right. Ms. Ndashi, do you agree with that, particularly with the online violence that women are experiencing now? Are you finding that we're struggling to craft laws that actually serve us in the way they should?
I think conceptually there is a struggle for people to understand what is the nature of this violence and therefore what's the state obligation. So for instance, in February of 2025, the African Union adopted a new convention on ending violence against women and girls. And in some quarters, this convention is celebrated as having done something in cyberspace. And conceptually, this really does not help us because we need to create rights. So the right here that we are talking about is the right to digital safety because that's what tech-facilitated GBV violates. And there are very clear things that we need to do. First of all, we need to prohibit all of these new forms of violence because with technology, there are new harms that have actually come into being. We know that we are dealing with cross-border jurisdiction, and that's something that really has to be clearly stated in the laws. But one of the big things that we are seeing, so for example, yesterday in the US, we saw that Meta, the people who own Facebook and Instagram, settled for over 17.1 billion for the failure to just protect children from the things that are happening there. And some of the things that they were talking about were things around just the kind of dependency, that these technologies kind of create for young people. So there is something that has to be done around the regulation of big tech because our governments do not own, these technologies.
Yes.
And also, when we are talking about some of the things that we have to do is the regulation of harmful content that we see when it is taken down and how fast that is and how easy it is for people to actually report these things. So unless our laws actually are very clear on what it means to protect people from tech-facilitated GBV and not just doing things that are performative, we continue, to experience the limitations in the law. South Africa has in many respects kind of tried to do well when it comes to adopting laws. And of course, these laws are kind of spread across different things like cyber security and all of that. And I do think that we need to get that, but it's the intentionality and an understanding conceptually of what it is that we are trying to do when we talk about tech-facilitated GBV.
Well, still to come on Case in Point. Does our legislation require further crafting to get it working for GBV survivors and to find justice for femicide victims? We'll tackle this after the break. Welcome back. Based on what we've heard, it seems South Africa's GBVF legislation passes muster overall. But how does one overlay our laws with the real-life experiences of women? The latest figures that Acting Police Commissioner Feroz Kachalia revealed in Parliament a few days ago suggest there have been more than 50,000 reported GBVF cases in the last financial year. Those led to nearly 31,000 arrests or National Prosecuting Authority referrals. Sexual offences in particular have run into tens of thousands for many years. This graph from 2020 to 25 shows the NPA's conviction rates of over 70% on average, but it's come in for criticism over that, considering many cases go unreported and not all the cases reported are prosecuted. So let's bring our experts back into the conversation at this point. Dr. Dangle, you had a look at those figures a little bit earlier on. Are we reading these figures correctly?
Well, I think that, clearly there's an attrition of the number of cases. So not everyone's reporting. And the number that have been given by the National Prosecuting Authority are probably figures of just those that have reported. So what happens to the number of women who actually don't report these cases? And so on that basis, I think the figures are probably problematic.
Mr. Shiping, can we take these figures on face value?
Thank you. I think these figures, the reporting aspect of how our current system is using reporting cannot comprehensively address the actual number of cases that have been entering the system. Those figures will reflect conviction rates relates to figures that cases that have seen the light of the court. There could be many other cases that have never reached the court. Percentages can be 2 cases or 10 cases to be 70% or 100%. What our system needs to capture is to advance its reporting mechanisms for accountability and transparency. The society needs to be able to enter the system and see where the backlog is and see where the delays are, where the presiding officers are not allocated, and where the cases are actually leading us. Essentially, all those factors, the current system is unable to tell us by a click of a button. If you were to request in our previous engagements, and many report in our website, indicate that many attempts they have tried to provide the data that we are needing. It takes long, it takes requests for postponements, requests for indulgence, in providing that data. And at that time, decisions need to be made that affect victims and survivors. Therefore, by merely reporting into a certain percentage, that is one of the aspects that the disadvantages monitoring and evaluation, accountability by the state, as well as oversight of governance, and to contribute to gender equality, as well as advancement of the thereof and an improvement of the system. We need to improve the reporting that is taking place, and we need to also be able to compare from province to province and align in terms of the NSP, as well as aligning with international instruments. And only reporting can tell us that without limitations that we are currently experiencing.
Dr. Dangle, your organization has also trained 5,000 social workers, police officers, judges. Would you say people in these roles sufficiently understand the laws of this country and their roles in terms of evidence gathering to secure convictions?
I think that is problematic, because if you look at training within the police, for many years we've trained police, but they often get changed in their positions. And so what happens is that training that you do is actually then not kind of completely focusing on the needs that we have for the particular requirement in those positions. And so I think those things are really problematic. We have not trained sufficiently as far as court officials are concerned. And so you still find the re-victimization of women within the court systems as well.
And I want to talk about that. Ms. Ndache, let me bring you back in here, because it wouldn't be uncommon to sit in on a court case pertaining to rape and to hear defense lawyers defending their client using rape culture. What were you wearing? Did you lead him on? Why didn't you scream, or why didn't you scream louder? It reminds me a little bit of the line of questioning that J. Kemp took during the Jacob Zuma rape trial. When are we going to see judges and officers of the court intervene to stop this practice?
When we talk about what happens in the courtroom, there's a lot of things that have already happened, to get there. The first thing is that sexual violence is normalized, legitimized, and excused. So what we are seeing in the courtroom is what has already happened in society. You hear 2 young women were found dead in Pretoria, and before you know it, the young women are blamed, for their murder. It's like, why were they out there? And it's because they were drinking this man's money, and they refused to put up, at the end of it, things that are really quite hard to hear. But I think we live in a society where actually there is a struggle to understand why all of this work was done in 1992 to refer to this violence as gender-based violence. Because once you get to the rape myths that are used in court and the gender stereotype, then you actually get to understand that what we are talking about, it is the failure for women to get justice because this violence is overwhelmingly gender specific in that it targets women more than men. But right now, there is a lot. We see it in what is called the manosphere, where you have got groups that are organizing online to really attack women and say all of this defamatory and demeaning things about women, these kind of cultures that we are seeing. But when people try to have this conversation in this country, what you actually hear is that, oh, but men get beaten up too by women, and really trying to justify why this violence actually happens. Women who think that they are more empowered, women who think that they are equal to men. So when we see this in the courtroom, it's basically telling us that we have to go back to prevention. Because, of course, there is work that needs to be done with the judicial officers, because sometimes you see this in the judgments, the rape myths and the gender stereotypes. You see this coming from defense counsel, and sometimes you see prosecution sometimes really not pushing back against this.
Yes.
But it is because the first point of call is that women are not believed, but also they are blamed for what happens to them, and it doesn't happen to other victims of crime in this manner.
Ms. Mungwira, I think Ms. Ndache is saying something really important here. We don't often speak about the gendered prejudices that arise from cultural or even religious environments that have their own set of laws, which sometimes conflict with the secular constitution like South Africa's. How do we navigate that reality?
I think that because we are saying that the root cause of our violence is the way we do life in our societies, our culture, the patriarchal culture, the harmful norms that we continue to pass on from generation to generation. I think if we are going to really see meaningful change, I think we need to press in on our work around changing the harmful cultural norms that continue to exist in our societies. We need to be working with men and boys. We need to be doing work with young girls to try to break or to try to change some of the things that we take as normal in our societies. If we don't go back to those basics, we are going to continue to see people live the way they know. So it's going to be the police are going to be handling cases based on their belief systems. The judges are going to be deliberating based on the belief systems that they hold dear. So sometimes it is not something, it is because you live in a society and you practice your life in a certain way every day, you do not think about it. And so as you do your work, some of those beliefs start to creep up and show up. So we definitely need to do a lot of work with young people, with men and boys, with young girls and women to change the gender norms, the harmful gender norms that we see. But we also need to do a lot of work around sensitization of the police, the judiciary, everyone who is handling issues of gender-based violence, so that we all learn and unlearn some of the harmful practices that we carry on in our work as an extension of who we are. So we need to continuously see that happening if we are going to see any meaningful change. We have already seen that the law is important. We need the law, but it is not enough. We need to address the way that people perceive the law and perceive the issues that they are confronted with every day if we are going to see some meaningful change.
Yeah, very interesting indeed. Well, we'll take a break now, and when we come back, we ask, is the adversarial legal system the most appropriate to try crimes like rape, or would an inquisitorial form of law work better? We'll test this idea after the break. Well, thanks for staying with us here on Case in Point. Here in the Commonwealth, we've adopted an adversarial system of trying crimes, including rape. But is this the best way for courts to solve these cases, or would an inquisitorial system work better, and what other solutions could work? Ms. Ndashe, let me bring you back in here. In countries like France or Germany, among others, we know the rape trial doesn't turn into a contest, pitting the prosecutor against the defendant to see who wins. Essentially, their inquisitorial system seeks answers based on a rigorous process of information gathering that the judge seems to actually lead. What do you think about that? Would it be workable in a country like ours?
Mistake to think that tinkering with the criminal justice system is going to give us the solutions that we need. Right now, we are talking about prosecution rates of less than 10% of the rape that happens in this country. So that is a mistake, to kind of focus on adversarial versus inquisitorial. In the beginning, you projected the 6 pillars of the National Strategic Plan. I've already talked about what's wrong with Pillar 1, and also the 3rd pillar, which is the criminal justice system. Here, it's not just what happens in the courtroom that's the problem. If we are just looking at the criminal response, we are talking about poor investigations. So when you've got those kind of systems, it's not just the prosecution just begins in the courtroom. You have people who don't receive the most basic of services in police stations, people who are victim blamed instead of having statements taken, or just like the basic investigation at the first level. So by the time you go to prosecution, there are people who are consulted right at the beginning, of the court case, which means that there hasn't been any link between the victim, the prosecution, and also the police. We have seen the shambolics that was the Omotoso trial. So to go and just tinker with rules of evidence at that kind of late stage and then say that this is what's going to, we just have to actually just banish, the attempt to do that, because there's been just a lot of tinkering. the 6 pillars of the National Strategic Plan, when fully or well implemented, are the solutions. Because it tells us that we have to prevent this violence. So when we prevent, we are not just saying we are dealing with a person who's harassing. It's about what happens in families, what happens in schools, in churches, where people meet, so that we don't even have to get to that stage where people feel that they are entitled to people's bodies, where they actually understand that no means no, autonomy and agency. So yes, we can always tinker with whatever it is that we want to tinker and actually learn from what's happening in the system, go to court and actually.
Okay, we're losing Mr.
The
Ndashe
heart
there.
of the
Let me
problem
bring you in,
that-
Mr. Shipping. What do you think? Could an inquisitorial system work in a legal system where women are often secondarily victimized in court?
Thank you. In terms of the system, I believe our jurisprudence, all the court's judgments, they have progressively delivered in that regard. We have a very good system where it ends up at Supreme Court of Appeal, at Constitutional Court for those Constitutional Court matters. Essentially, the question that remains is that, is this system responsive to the survivors and victims? Is it accessible to diverse and inclusive to older persons? Is it inclusive to children? Is it inclusive to persons with disabilities? Is it accessible to urban-based people as well as rural-based people? Essentially, the system itself, in terms of jurisprudence and all the legislative developments, we must acknowledge the state has tried through the judiciary, legislature, as well as the executive. But today, we have classification of GBVF as a problem. Therefore, the system needs to be addressed. And essentially pointing out the issue of the system to be inquisitorial is not going to respond to the questions that we are asking, that our reporting mechanism, does it allow monitoring and evaluation for accountability to take place?
All right. Very quick one from you, Dr. Dangor. What do we need right now? The interventions that we need to start putting in place from tomorrow?
Well, I think that, you're looking at the training of people at those levels within the justice system. People are not adequately trained. You find survivors don't get proper communication. The investigating officers are not in touch with court officials. So I think at a very straightforward, simple, administrative level, you need to start looking at issues around communication, even between the court and the survivor, because survivors are sent from pillar to post when they're actually visiting courts. And so these kind of things are really, really very problematic. So I don't think it's a question of changing the system necessarily as much as it is in terms of trying to improve the whole monitoring, evaluation, training of the staff, and looking at the patriarchal approaches.
A very last quick one from you, Ms. Mungwari. The National Strategic Plan is in place, but Pillar 3 particularly looks at strengthening the criminal justice system response to GBV. Is this something the UN will throw its weight behind?
Most certainly, we are excited that we are starting to see progress with the council now in place. I think everyone was frustrated by the delays in the operationalization of the council, and so we are excited to see that there's movement there, and we will definitely be in support. And of course, as I conclude, I also want to say that in this conversation we have talked a lot around issues of responding to gender-based violence, and we also need to remember that prevention is better than cure. And so we need to start to work around prevention of gender-based violence, also taking a much more centered approach in our interventions. And then the reactive work also happens to help our survivors of violence. So prevention, changing the context in which women are living and experiencing violence, and making sure that it is responsive to the needs of survivors of violence.
Very good way on which to end our conversation. conversation. Thank you so much to all of you for your fantastic insights into this. Did you know that reporting domestic violence or a sexual offence against vulnerable groups is not just a moral act, but a legal obligation with criminal consequences if you fail to report it? The Domestic Violence Act obliges any person who suspects or reasonably believes that a child, a person with a disability or an older person is subjected to domestic violence to report such an abuse to the police. Similarly, the Sexual Offences and Related Matters Act requires that any person who suspects or reasonably believes that a child or a mentally disabled person is sexually abused must report that abuse to the police. Failing to report this is a criminal offence. It can lead to a fine, imprisonment, or both. Those who report in good faith are protected from civil or criminal liability. Before we wrap up our show tonight, if you're facing a legal or justice issue that you'd like us to explore, please email us on caseinpoint@sabc.co.za. That's a wrap from us for tonight. We'll see you next Thursday at 8 p.m. Take care till then. Bye-bye.